many people have logged in?
Sir, around 31 are there, sir. So we'll start, sir. Slowly people will join.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, let's start. Good afternoon, everybody. You can hear me clearly?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, okay. And you can see the slides clearly.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Now, this is an interactive session. Again, I want you, uh, one or two or three people to be ready to answer questions so that we can move on quickly to further questions. So, among the people who have logged in, I think I'll give you 1 minute to decide among yourself who is going to answer. Two or three of you should raise their hands or put on their mic and among yourself decide who is going to do it. Okay, one person will be the primary one, other person can be one or two more if that question passes on. Okay, can you do that now?
Oh, okay, sir. Uh, yes, sir. Um, one second, sir. I'll just see the name, sir.
Okay. And tell me who is going to be the primary person responding. Like, and give me two, three names.
Yes, sir. Sir, we have Dr. Pragati. We have Dr. Sharon. We have and Dr. Amita. We have, sir.
Okay.
So we'll start with them, sir.
And you three people: Pragati, Amitabh, and
Amit and
Sharon.
Sharon, sir.
Sharon.
Yes.
Okay. You three
Yes.
people are ready to go.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. Fine. Good. So, but I think did any of you answer last time?
Yes, sir.
Um,
Better if you give turns to everybody else. Somebody else volunteers, it'll be better. If nobody is volunteering, then you do it. I have no problem. Okay. Okay. So this is
okay,
another
sir.
interactive
Okay, sir.
session with a live case. Um, History and as I said, clinical cases are very, very important. They teach us a lot. They make you think on a problem and different aspects of the problem, and also prepares you for your real life cardiology practice. It requires a good background of theory, and therefore it's not only a patient clinical discussion. It is a very good. It will be a very good revision for your theory if you listen to some of the points and go back and read about it. So let's start with the patient's history. 27-year-old lady. Month of April we were all shut down for COVID, so there was no OPD. So we were doing remote consultations on television and on telephone and WhatsApp. So one 27-year-old lady asked for teleconsultation in April 20th. She was pregnant 18 weeks and her obstetrician has advised cardiology consultation by an obstetrician, by her obstetrician, because she suspected a valvular heart disease. Okay, so who is answering? Pragati, is it? Okay, Pragati, so you're the doctor who picked up the call. So what next? She says, my doctor says I suspect a heart disease. I'm pregnant. What should I do? Are you there?
So we need her history first, sir, if she's having any cardiac symptoms,
Oh,
cardinal
good.
symptoms or no.
So you'll take a history on the telephone itself. So
Hello, sir.
yes,
Am I audible, sir? So
yeah,
we
I can
need
hear
to
you. I
need
can
to
hear
know
you.
her cardinal symptoms first, sir. If
Yeah,
she's
yeah,
having any symptoms
yeah.
first.
I heard that. You're right. So she's class two, but mainly tiredness. Sometimes she feels slightly out of breath when she's trying to climb stairs. So somebody's mic is on, making noise. Background. Somebody is talking. Only the two people who or three people who are answering questions should keep their mic on. Otherwise, all other people mic off, please. Okay. So so you wanted the history. This is the history she gave you on telephone. Class 2 symptoms, mainly tiredness. Occasionally some breathlessness when she goes upstairs. No nocturnal dyspnea, no pedal edema, no palpitation. She's able to do all her work at home, but she takes rest after the work. Yes, what next?
So we'll evaluate her clinically.
Hey, you're on telephone. How are you going to evaluate clinically? Come on, you must
Telephone.
listen to the question, please.
Yes.
Evaluate clinically. How are you going to evaluate on telephone? Okay, next. Who is answering?
Sir, if the gynecologist has given any cardiac findings or the hemodynamical findings, sir, on clinical examination.
The obstetrician doesn't give hemodynamic findings, man.
Like pulse, BP, and if any cardiac finding, if they can give.
You want to look for the basic clinical findings.
Basic clinical, yes, sir.
But how do you ask the patient? You have to be. See, imagine you're in front of the patient. You're answering a phone call. Don't tell me in medical term. What did the obstetrician tell you about your hemodynamics? Would you ask that question like that?
Sir, they might be having prescription or something.
Yeah,
where the
show me all your
papers.
The simple answer is show me all your papers on telephone. Read out your papers, or if you are on WhatsApp video call, show me your papers.
Papers, yes, sir.
Okay, that's what you should do. So you won't ask any past history.
Past history is important. Yes.
Don't you want to know the first pregnancy or second pregnancy, whether the previous pregnancy she had any trouble, whether she had any hypertension, eclampsia, diabetes? You've forgotten that in the history, no? Okay. So these are some things you should always, hypertension, eclampsia should always come to your mind in a pregnant lady.
Yes, sir.
Okay. The previous delivery was absolutely normal. Okay. Then you ask for her papers. You didn't ask for her medication. Is she on any medication? Not on any medication. So you want to see her papers. So all papers available from past to present. The only detail she had is that the obstetrician has written in one small slip of paper. You know how they write in small slips, BP 130 by 80, and in another corner it is written hemoglobin 10.8, random blood sugar 96. So she doesn't have gestational diabetes.
One primary done, sir. Sorry, sir.
What did you say? Okay, so she's not a gestational diabetic. Her hemoglobin is okay. She's not hypertensive. So the next question will be, see, any doctor, any GP, anybody nowadays when they suspect a heart disease, what do? They ask for an echo.
ECG,
they always ask for an echo. And nowadays our echo has become very, very common investigation. Even a GP orders an echo nowadays. So definitely you must ask, have you had an echo done outside? Yes. The echo report, we don't have the detail. Again, in another corner of the OPD sheet, it is written mitral stenosis with pulmonary hypertension. That's it. No more details. So now what do you do? So she is on telephone. The obstetrician feels that she has severe mitral stenosis, pulmonary hypertension. Is mildly symptomatic or no symptom, like class 2 plus minus symptoms. Come on, guys, you're on the telephone. She's holding the line. Anybody, come on. Hello, can you hear me?
So NT-proBNP?
NT-proBNP. You will order NT-proBNP on telephone. Any other answer? Any better answer?
So we'll ask for heart rate.
How many patients can tell you the heart rate? Layman can tell you the heart rate on telephone?
Whether she has done the ECG, sir?
No, he says no, nothing else has been done. Only echo has been done.
Okay, sir. Sir, what trimester she was in, sir? We didn't
I
get.
told you at the beginning, no? 18 weeks.
Okay, sir.
Severe.
Guys, she is on the telephone. You have to decide.
Has she
whether-
consulted a cardiologist before, sir? Because she has had a delivery before.
No.
And
She
was this
didn't
first
know
time?
about heart disease. No, I told you. She doesn't know anything about her heart disease. First time, suddenly,
Okay, sir.
gynecologist is telling her that you please go. I think you have a heart disease.
So severe left-sided obstructive lesions are contraindications for pregnancy.
Madam, she is already pregnant. He didn't ask you whether I can become pregnant. See, your answer should. This is the problem. You people are not listening to the questions. She is already pregnant, no? Now you will tell her you should not become pregnant. If she had asked you,
ask her to.
no, wait. If she had asked you before becoming pregnant, yes, I agree with you. You tell her not to get pregnant unless heart disease is treated. But now she's already come 18 weeks. Are you going to tell her to terminate pregnancy?
Sir, I'll ask her regarding the medications. Regarding drugs she is taking.
No, I told you, no, she's not on any cardiac medication. Hey guys, you're not listening.
Sir, it is the.
You're not
Sir,
reading.
it's the case of.
Look, it's here. Not on any medication. I have written there clearly. Please read the
Sir,
slide.
it is a diagnosed case of MS, sir, and symptomatic. Patient may need medications along with if it is not symptoms is not improved with medication, we can go for a second trimester PTMC, sir.
Oh, you are going too fast for me. She is on the telephone. You will tell all this to her. I'll give you medication. Otherwise, I will do second trimester. I will do balloon valvotomy for you. This is what you're going to tell her. See, you're not. I mean, this is why I'm doing this case study. You must know how to talk to your patient. Is that the way you will talk to the patient?
No,
I will do balloon valvotomy in your second trimester. Is that the way you will talk? She wants to know what she should do now. She is worried. Yesterday the doctor told me I have a heart disease. Doctor, I don't know what to do. You are not solving her problem. The most important thing is you have to make a mental assessment of what all pregnancy with heart disease is a risk factor. But you have to assess the risk of that patient. Don't you think so? And before that, don't you want to see her on a video? Whatever you can see, you can't ask her to expose her chest. But at least you can see whether she's, ask her to show her face on video, whether she's dyspneic, whether she's tachypneic, whether she's sweating, whether she's comfortable or restless, whether she's got cyanosis or clubbing, whether she's got pedal edema. She can show her neck, whether her JVP is elevated. Don't you think this is possible? On a WhatsApp call? What, yes or no?
Yes, sir, possible.
Yes, sir.
Then you should do this. You have to check. You assume that she is symptomatic. No, don't you want to look at her? Whether she is distressed, she is cyanosis, she is clubbed, she is having elevated JVP. Okay, so when I did that, I found that she was not very in distress. She did not look cyanos, no clubbing, no edema. And when I saw her neck, JVP is not elevated. No, beyond that, I cannot do that. She is at home. I cannot examine her precordium. So now what do I do? Does she break the corona lockdown and go for a police permission and then catch a train and come to our hospital immediately. Is that your advice? You have to counsel her that she is definitely worried. But the most important thing is risk stratification, no? Don't you know that you have to assess into what risk category she falls before you talk to her? Have you heard of any grading or classification of pregnancy with heart disease?
Yes, sir. WHO may have got, sir.
Because you have to grade the patient. Of course, you can grade only after seeing the patient, I agree, but roughly you can grade from the history and from the appearance, and you know the diagnosis is mitral stenosis. Mitral stenosis is a diagnosis which most people can make out. Any Tom, Dick and Harry, if he does echo, they will tell you mitral stenosis. So the diagnosis must be correct. So only the severity we don't know. So we have to assume that the diagnosis is correct. So we have to make a risk stratification in our mind. Just, that is for your own mental assessment, and then you have to talk to her. So how do you assess? You do go by the classification. One is the WHO grading. Any other grading you have know about?
Carpreg and Zahara, sir.
Yes, Zahara. Now, Zahara is a bit too complicated to use. So I wouldn't recommend that. So Carpreg is a bit simple, which you can use. Now they have identified some risk factors. Each one is considered as 1 point. So prior cardiac event, any prior cardiac pulmonary edema, acute event and all, prior arrhythmia, or more than class 2. Not class 2 is not a point. More than class 2 is point. That is, should be class 3 or presence of cyanosis. Left heart obstruction. Yes, she has got this. And systemic ventricular dysfunction, we don't know, but at least in mitral stenosis, we don't expect low ejection fraction. Therefore, out of these 4 factors, she probably has one factor, that is left heart obstruction. So she falls into the category of 1 risk factor and a 27% risk. What is 27% risk? Risk of what? Cardiac events, not death. It's a risk of cardiac events. So 27% is not a small figure. She's not a low risk. Tight mitral stenosis in pregnancy, the probability of an incident, death or non-fatal event like heart failure, abortion, some sort of a bad event happening is almost 1/4 of the patient will have risk. So she is not very low risk, she is not a very high risk, she is a moderate risk. The high risk means more than 2 factors, 75% risk. So that is a Carpreg score. So now our assessment is she is a moderate risk heart disease patient with pregnancy. If you go by the WHO of 2011, they have made 4 grades. The first 2 grades are shown here. The first one is not much of risk, no risk, increased risk. There is a very mild PS, small VSD, very mild corrected lesions and all that. Small maternal risk is unoperated ASD, VSD, operated tetralogy of Fallon, these things. Well, these 2 don't fit into that. Class 3, and probably this is where our patient would fit in, or class 3 or class 4, significantly increased risk of morbidity or mortality, and both cardiac and obstetrical events. And here you get valve disease, Fontan, complex heart disease, and so on and so forth. But class 4, they say pregnancy is contraindicated, but this contraindication doesn't arise because our patient is already pregnant. So here severe mitral stenosis comes in. So severe obstructive lesions on the left side comes as class 4. So our patient falls somewhere between moderate to high risk grade of pregnancy with heart disease. You agree? Hello?
Yes, sir.
According to the Carpreg, she is moderate. According to the WHO category, she is severe. So what is your advice now? On telephone, everything is going on telephone so far.
Sir, first thing is counseling, sir.
You have to counsel her, but
yes,
you should not frighten her. That's very important. Too bad. Who asked you to become pregnant? You didn't, why didn't you meet a doctor before you became pregnant? That sort of scolding is not definitely to be done. Now, we have to understand that she has a significant valve disease. We assume that the diagnosis is correct. But however, she has gone through one pregnancy without any problem. Her previous pregnancy is reassuring. Therefore, although she has a high risk condition and she needs full evaluation and supervision as soon as possible, she needs to come for a full evaluation to your hospital. But the question is when? She cannot come now because there is a curfew. Therefore, we'll tell her, look, at the moment you are asymptomatic, you are only in 18 weeks of pregnancy. Therefore, let us wait for another 2 to 4 weeks. And hopefully when the shutdown is open up, you come for a detailed assessment. You have a heart disease, you need to be evaluated, you need to be supervised, but don't worry, we probably nothing is going to happen in the next 1 or 2 weeks. Okay? That will be my answer. She cannot catch a train or a bus in the middle of the shutdown and come all the way from somewhere outside the city. Now, till then, you have to give her some advice. No, doctor, what should I do till then?
Yes, sir. So there are a couple of advice. First thing is the warning signs we have to explain to her.
I'm sorry.
Like we have to explain. Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yeah. Now, yeah. Talk.
Yeah, sir. We have to explain her some warning symptoms and signs, sir. Like
Very good. Very good. You have to warn her some symptoms to watch out for. What else?
Like breathlessness if it is increasing, or
Okay.
if you feel the heart rate is increasing a lot.
Good.
Yes.
What else?
After that, sir, if it's an emergency, definitely she has to come without any doubt, sir,
Okay.
to the hospital.
Yeah.
After, meanwhile, sir, yes.
Meanwhile,
Sir, can we start her on medical management like diuretic and this thing? We can start her on the.
Doc, you are the doctor on the telephone. Are you asking me now?
No, sir. Meanwhile, we will start her on beta blocker and diuretics, sir. Low dose.
Why diuretics?
Yeah, sir. She's in NOH class 2, I think, sir. No need of diuretics, sir. But beta blocker, it will help, sir.
Okay. Anything else? Remember, she's doing normal activity at home and
avoid physical exercise.
Avoid what?
Avoid strenuous physical exercise, physical activity.
What is strenuous, doctor?
She is actually symptomatic, not symptomatic with symptomatic with her ordinary activities.
She is not symptomatic with ordinary activities. I told you. She gets this only when she goes up flights of stairs. See, the reason I am putting these questions to you is you people should know how to talk to your patient. Avoid heavy exertion. The moment I ask you, doctor, please tell me what is heavy exertion, you are not able to answer. Your answer should be, activity should be guided by your symptoms. Don't do any activity which produces symptoms. Is that simple?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So, avoid heavy exertion is a vague instruction. Tell her you do whatever you are comfortable, whatever you are not comfortable, don't do it. Any cardiac medications? No. I haven't seen her yet. I don't think she is in heart failure yet. And therefore, I will not advise any cardiac medication, and particularly in a pregnant lady. I will not advise any medication. I don't agree with you, medications. Symptoms to report, you already said. Increasing dyspnea, appearance of pedal edema, palpitation, etc. She should report immediately. And in any case, probably every week or every 2 weeks, she should keep in touch with us. But we have to important tell her that you appear to be a moderate risk to high risk, but this needs to be confirmed. Let us see, we'll probably be cautious, but at the same time, let us be optimistic about your pregnancy. Okay? This is what I would advise her on telephone. but contact me again after a week, after 2 weeks. Every week, keep talking to us. Okay? Right.
Yes, sir.
Schedule a teleconsultation again at 2 weeks. Hopefully, by that time, the shutdown may be relaxed. But what happened was she didn't call it 2 weeks. As usual, our patients, no, for more than a month, they kept quiet. So that was in first week of April. Okay, third week of April. So for 5 weeks later, suddenly I got a call from the family. Doctor, she is very breathless. She is coughing badly. She has got a blood-streaked sputum, and she's got palpitation, very fast palpitations. And then she phoned, and then she said, "Doctor, she's already on the way to your hospital." She got a call, and a couple of hours later, they landed up in the emergency room. Okay, are you listening?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. No, because you should read all this. Otherwise, then I have to go back and forth. That's one. So when she came to the hospital, we found her that she's very, very anxious, very dyspneic, very orthopnic. She's coughing continuously, marked tachycardia, blood pressure 144/80, tachypneic, mildly saturation pulse oximeter reading about 82%. When we put her on oxygen, saturation increased to about 88-89%. Her JVP was elevated. Liver 3 centimeters, the parasternal heave, loud second sound, no murmurs at all, and bilateral crepitations. Okay?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So, you okay with the findings?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Shall I move the slide?
Yes, sir. You can move, sir.
Okay. So that's her jugular veins. If you want to see that. Tell me your interpretation.
Sir, first thing, JVP is raised, sir. It is approx, I think, around 6 to 8 centimeter above the sternal notch. Then coming to the waves.
No, wait. 6 to 8 centimeters above the
sternal notch.
So how much is the JVP? That means is that the way you report? I want to know JVP or predicted RA pressure, whatever it is. How do you do it?
Yes, sir. So if we consider 7 centimeter, 7 plus 5 we have to do, sir. 5 centimeter. So it will be 12 centimeter. 1 centimeter is 0.8 of mm of Hg. So the pressure will be 1.36 centimeter is equal to 1 mm. So
yeah, okay. So roughly 10 millimeters. RA 10. Okay.
Yes, sir. So it is elevated, sir. Okay. Elevated RA pressure. Yeah. So next thing is coming to the waves, sir. I can see intermittent A wave, sir, but otherwise flickering waves of A wave are absent, sir. And there is a large V wave. V wave is also there, sir. Prominent V wave is there, and prominent X and Y descent both are there, sir.
Hey, come on. If you are seeing X descent, there must be a wave, isn't it? Come on.
Yes, sir.
How can you see X descent without a wave?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So,
can't you see there are 2 waves per cardiac cycle?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
Can you see the jugular vein? For every cardiac cycle, there are 2 waves, you know, up AX, VY, 2 upstroke, 2 downstroke. So beautifully seen.
Yes, sir. Yes.
And is the A prominent? Is the V prominent? Both are prominent? Both are not prominent? You have to tell me something, no?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So both are prominent, sir. There is a
okay. Both are prominent, but
yes.
Okay. So which is more prominent? Any guesses?
V is more prominent.
Okay, I think we'll have a separate session on JVP. I disagree with you. I think the A is more prominent. That flickering wave is the A wave. I'm planning to do a session on JVP anyway with you, maybe today or some other day. Okay, so that flick like wave is the A wave. Huh? So definitely A wave is coming up to almost the upper 2/3 of the neck. So A wave is almost 10-12 millimeters, 12 centimeters into the neck.
Okay,
And right. So now what? So there is a pregnant lady who come with acute respiratory symptoms. Now you have examined. Now what is your conclusion?
So conclusion: this is a clear-cut case of pulmonary edema, sir. Acute pulmonary edema.
Okay.
So that is her, sir. She's in tachycardia. She's everything in distress also. So she needs to be hospitalized. Ventilation, like in terms of non-invasive ventilation, should be started. Diuretic infusion or bolus dose should be started, sir. Bolus after.
Hey, you're jumping too fast, man. That's all. The ER room, immediately you talk of ventilation, infusion, and all that. Let's go through the discussion process. No. See, whenever you see a patient as such in the ER room, the first thing is, mentally you go through a list of conditions which are likely to produce. So any pregnant lady, so this lady, somebody told you mitral stenosis. Tomorrow you may get a lady pregnant lady in the ER room who doesn't tell you a history of mitral stenosis. So you must be prepared with a mental list of conditions which can produce acute respiratory symptoms. So that list you must have in mind already. So this is this is a list you should always have in mind when a pregnant lady comes with acute respiratory symptoms. Of course, she can have pneumonia, she can have exacerbation of asthma. Now, pregnancy is a pro-thrombotic condition, therefore pulmonary embolism is always possible. Pulmonary edema is possible because of pre-existing valvular heart disease. She may be hypertensive due to pregnancy, or she may be a eclampsia patient, or she may be having underlying cardiomyopathy. She may be a pulmonary arterial hypertension to begin with, and she has become, because most of our patients don't know what they have. She may be a case of peripartum cardiomyopathy from the previous pregnancy, and now this pregnancy it's getting aggravated. That's possible. Is that possible? Yes, it can be.
Yes.
And of course, these two conditions don't occur in early pregnancy. They are late pregnancy, amniotic fluid embolism and chorioamnitis presenting like an ARDS. So quickly in your mind, you should keep this list always in your mind. Okay. You still haven't made a diagnosis, so you must keep all these things in mind. Of course, in this case, you have a clue that somebody told her she has mitral stenosis. Okay. Now, you always get some basic investigations, isn't it? And before you proceed further, can you order them before you start giving Lasix and also that it takes time for the blood results to come back. So some investigations are ordered. Yeah, what does it show?
Sir, ABG is showing it's a mixed metabolic and respiratory acidosis, sir. 1 second, sir.
No, I don't agree with you.
Sorry, 1 second, sir.
Come on, guys. In these simple blood tests and all, you should not make mistakes. No? We are not testing your ABG knowledge here, but still, if you make this mistake, it creates a bad impression.
There is a metabolic acidosis with hypoxemia, sir.
What else?
There is an elevated WBC count.
No, blood gas. Hypoxia, metabolic acidosis. Carbon dioxide washout, partially compensated. PCO2 is 30 on the lower side. So there is hypoxia with metabolic acidosis with attempts to compensate by washing out carbon dioxide, partially compensated metabolic acidosis. Okay, polys are increased with leukocytosis, maybe acute infection has precipitated the whole thing. Hemoglobin 9.6, somewhat lower than what she told you earlier. Earlier she said some 11 something, isn't it? Okay. Okay, normal electrolytes and all those things normal. Okay, now what?
She's anemic also. Yes. Coming to the ECG will come, sir.
Quick.
Yes, sir. ECG. ECG, 12 lead ECG, normal standardization. Sinus rhythm, so there is a P wave. P wave is enlarged. There is a P mitrale is there, sir. Then coming to the P wave axis is normal. QRS axis is normal, sir. It is around.
Shall I tell you one
60.
thing? In the emergency room, when a patient is in pulmonary edema, you don't take this long to interpret a ECG. Since you are diagnosed with mitral stenosis, pulmonary edema, you go straight to the findings of mitral stenosis. You said left atrial enlargement is there. The other next important thing is sinus rhythm.
Sinus rhythm and tachycardia.
Tachycardia. Third important finding is?
There is no atrial fibrillation, sir.
Once you have said
we are ruled out. Yes.
Come on, man. You already said no sinus rhythm. How can you have atrial fibrillation now?
Yes.
There is no right ventricular hypertrophy. That's all you have to say. Okay. So, because chronic pulmonary hypertension will produce right ventricular hypertrophy. So, sinus tachycardia and left atrial enlargement. That's all you see in ECG. That doesn't help you in the acute management anyway, as long as she is in sinus rhythm. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, that's the X-ray. Come on.
Yes.
No. The emergency room, you don't take this long, man. This X-ray.
Sir, X-ray showing bilateral haziness, suggest of pulmonary edema, sir. Grade 4.
Yeah. What else?
Left cardiac borders, left atrial appendage is enlarged, sir. Then pulmonary artery is also enlarged. There is no cardiomegaly.
You're going back and forth, no? You started with pulmonary edema, then you came to pulmonary artery, then you came to LA. Now you're going to cardiomegaly. Please follow one routine, no? No cardiomegaly, left atrial enlargement, main pulmonary artery prominent, left atrial appendage prominent. Both lungs appear edematous.
Yes.
Anything else? What is this line here?
Interlobar fissure.
Okay. Interlobar?
Fissure.
So why is fissure seen?
Fluid is there, sir.
Interlobar effusion.
Effusion.
Okay. Yes. So, gross bilateral pulmonary edema.
Yes.
With LA enlargement. Okay?
Yes.
All right. Now what? Come on, move fast.
Echo will do, sir.
Okay. Echo will take about 20 minutes for the machine to come.
So we have to start with the management. Then,
what management?
So first, that's what airway. Then, sir, airway we have to secure. So like a non-invasive will start.
We have to secure. Come on, man. You are the doctor. You tell me steps. No, you have to give instruction to the nurse.
Yes, sir. We have to start her on.
Do this.
We have to start her on non-invasive ventilation, sir.
Is that the first thing you give symptom relief by diuretics?
Diuretics we have to give, sir, bolus.
Parenteral bolus of diuretic relief of symptoms.
Yes, sir.
Of course, simultaneously you order antibiotic because almost certainly she has an infection. She has wheezing. If she has wheezing and infection, you may consider this is all done simultaneously.
Yes.
Then you put her on oxygen. You can try by PAP.
Yes.
However, in this patient, she has got even on oxygen significant hypoxia. You should have a very low threshold for intubation because she is quite hypoxic. On 10 liters of oxygen, saturation only 89%.
Yes, sir.
Therefore, it's important to maintain adequate oxygenation in the mother to maintain oxygenation for the baby. I'll discuss it a little while later, the same thing. Now, her PO2 was only 46, if you remember the blood gases, right?
Yes, sir.
To maintain adequate fetal oxygenation, you need maternal PO2 to be at least 70 or above. Any PO2 less than 70 in the mother is likely to affect fetal oxygenation. This corresponds to arterial saturation of 90 to 95%. Therefore, if with mask and oxygen or BiPAP is not able to maintain this amount of oxygen, you must immediately intubate for positive pressure ventilation, and you use positive end expiratory pressure to improve oxygenation. Of course, in some patient, because of pneumonia or collapse of the lung, the PCO2 may be high. In that case, it's also important to intubate to bring down the PCO2 and correct the pH, because all these factors are bad for the baby. PO2 of less than 70, PCO2 of less than more than 40, and pH of less than 7.3 is quite harmful to the baby. Therefore, you must have a low threshold for intubation. So this lady will require ventilation.
Ventilation, yes.
And then next step what? Any other management? You said something about
beta blocker. Yes, sir, beta
very
blocker.
Good. You have to control tachycardia. One of the basic things in mitral stenosis is if you have tachycardia, there is less time for diastolic flow through the mitral valve, and therefore you use drugs to reduce the heart rate, either beta blockers or ibuprofen. But be careful, if the patient has a lot of wheezing, you may be careful with beta blockers or calcium channel blockers. Somehow you should control the tachycardia. Okay? And then, of course, by the time the portable echo machine has arrived and you did a quick screening echo at the bedside and the patient is being intubated and all, this is what you got.
Yes.
What does it show?
Sir, in the first image, plaques view, sir, we can see that AML is thickened.
It shows mitral stenosis.
Mitral stenosis.
Okay.
Yes.
That's all I want. Okay.
Okay.
It shows mitral stenosis. This is a very brief screening echo. We have only the still frame available. So it shows mitral stenosis. So we know that we are dealing with cardiac lesion causing acute pulmonary edema precipitated by a pregnancy and lung infection. Okay.
Yes.
Next day, with diuretics and ventilation, the chest X-ray improved. Although the interlobar effusion is still persisting, pulmonary venous hypertension is still persisting, but the edema is much less than before. The oxygenation improved. Okay?
Yes.
So subsequently what happened was she was extubated on day 2. Her heart rate settled from 140 to 90 per minute. And now you could hear a loud first sound, opening snap, apical MDM with a polysystolic accentuation, a short systolic murmur at the left sternal border. Now, why is it that we didn't hear any murmur during the acute phase?
Because of the tachycardia.
Tachycardia should make the murmur better. That is what mitral stenosis, when you want to hear the murmur better, you make them exercise, no? Am I right?
She was in pulmonary edema, so the murmur was not well appreciated.
Why should pulmonary edema affect the murmur? Pulmonary edema crepitations on the back. I am listening on the front.
Severe PH.
Very good. Severe PAH. So what does severe PAH do?
That is like a second stenosis, sir. It will mask.
Good. It reduces the forward cardiac output. So the patient, when they have acute pulmonary edema and hypoxia, they go into pulmonary vasoconstriction and the cardiac output drops. When the cardiac output drops, the mitral stenosis gradient is reduced and you don't hear the murmur. Although the stenosis is very tight. Don't you know that mitral stenosis, when the cardiac output is low, you won't hear a murmur. Okay? When you have tachycardia, actually, when you exercise and do tachycardia, the cardiac output increases and you actually hear the murmur better. So tachycardia itself is not the reason. It's because of the low cardiac output. But when the heart rate slows down, when the pneumonia improves, pulmonary edema improves, the output improves, and now the murmur is clearly audible. So gradually she was ambulated over the next few days. She continued to have class 2 to class 3 symptoms. Class 2 to class 3 treatment on dyspnea. Now she was on regular diuretics, furosemide, spironolactone, ivabradine, beta blockers, everything, full medication. He continues to have class 2 to 3 symptoms. And now what is your plan?
Sir, plan is first to counsel the patient and the attender, sir, patient and the attender. She is a symptomatic severe mitral stenosis with PH, sir. So she should undergo a BMV, sir.
No, talk in medical terms, no? You don't. First tell me medical terms, you know. You always talk in the examination and always in practice also. If you use scientific terms, it's far more impressive and convincing. You must say that in your risk assessment of this patient, the risk stratification, she has moved from the moderate into the very high risk category. Earlier, there was no history of previous cardiac event. Now she has a history of previous cardiac event.
Yes.
When you first assessed her for risk stratification in Karpik's score, she was no previous cardiac event. Now she has had one episode of pulmonary edema and hepatitis. So now she becomes a highest risk category in both WHO and in Karpik score.
Yes.
So you must tell them, according to our classification in more than one system, we find she is a very high risk category. Her chances of having a complication during the pregnancy is what percentage?
75, sir, according to that Karpik.
60 to 75%. Yes. That's a very high risk of event percentage of likely events. Agreed? So your plan will be based on your risk assessment. So you must talk in a scientific manner. Look, my risk assessment is very high now. Therefore, we have to plan accordingly. So what is your plan?
Sir, plan is that's what, sir, counseling and then make the patient ready for PBMV, sir. And see
what do you mean?
That there are no contracts.
Make the patient ready means what? Arrange money.
Means like whether she's we should rule out the contraindication for PBMV.
Who will rule out? Who will rule out? I will rule out, or patient will rule out? Who will rule out?
No, sir. We will rule out.
Not we. It is you. You are the cardiologist. Yes. So how will you rule out? You haven't told me that, no?
Sir. Yes, sir. We have to rule. I have to rule out LA appendage thrombus, sir.
But tell me how, man. Patient will rule out thrombosis.
Francis Pagely.
So tell me. First, we have done only a screening bedside echo in the emergency room. I will ask for a detailed echo.
TT. Yes, sir.
That is a simple answer I want. So I will ask for a detailed echo. Right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Detailed transthoracic echo. If necessary, I will ask for a transesophageal echo also. But at the moment, I will ask for a transthoracic echo. And since she is a thin-chested person, I got all the information from transthoracic. You saw her the jugular venous picture, no? She was a very thin lady. So I got excellent pictures. The detailed echocardiogram is the next step. So this is the report I got from my echo lab. Severe mitral stenosis, area 1.1 centimeter square, pressure half time 220 milliseconds, mean gradient 20 millimeters of mercury, predicted right ventricular systolic pressure of 60 millimeters of mercury, mild TR, dilated right atrium and left atrium. This is a echo report which a technician called up and told me. Now what?
Mitral
So-
regurgitation
No,
is not
no,
mentioned,
no,
sir.
no MR. Yeah.
Calcification,
Any other information you want? No aortic problems.
We want
Subvalvular pathology.
Sorry, one of you talk, please.
Wilkins score.
Okay, Wilkins score. What is the other person who asked? What is that?
Subvalvular pathology is the same.
Subvalvular pathology. Very good. I agree with both of you. This report is incomplete. I want you guys to realize that this report is very incomplete. I want a full report. Whenever you report mitral stenosis, you should automatically tell me whether it's suitable for balloon or not. That should be part of the report. I don't have to ask you, is it suitable for balloon? That is not the way. The report should say that. Therefore, those findings are missing. Therefore, I will walk over and I will have a look at the echo myself. That's what you people should do. So, we walk over to the echo lab and I put all the views in one screen so as to save time. Have a quick look. Oh, sorry, wait a minute. Okay, is that enough?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So what's your interpretation?
Wilkinson's score is 3 by 8. Because thickness is 1, movement 1, subvalvular fusion mild, no calcification.
Okay, I don't know what these people calculated the Wilkins score. I will just see. Okay, but according to you, Wilkins score is not very high.
Yes, sir.
Well, you are very generous. You said 3 out of 8.
8.
Okay, that's it. And
Then mitral
then, wait a
regurgitation.
minute, Wilkins score is scored out of 8 or 16?
16, sir. 16.
So where does it 8 come from?
No, sir. 16, sir.
Then where does it 8 come from?
The 3 out of 16, sir. 4 each.
16, madam. 3 out of 16 is normal, practically normal valve we are talking about. Mitral stenosis will never have a score of 3. So anyway, it is definitely not beyond 8, somewhere between 6 to 8, I would say. It's a mobile valve, thin, not too much of thickening. It is subvalvular pathology. They have graded at mild to moderate only, and I can't see any calcification. Anyway, but I think you should read your Wilkins score again. 3 is not possible, but the Wilkins score is not very high. Okay, and
Yes.
yes, what do you see here?
CW of mitral valve where the mean gradient is showing 20 and maximum gradient 36.
Okay. Right. So conclusion.
It is a severe mitral stenosis, but one thing is, sir, that the second part is more than the first part, so atrial contribution is still quite more, which is usually we don't see in echo of severe mitral stenosis patient.
Why not?
Because, sir,
That's the advantage of being in sinus rhythm, no?
yes, sir, that is true. But, sir, when it becomes very severe, usually, sir, the first is maximum contribution is from the first feeling only.
No.
No, sir. Okay.
Only is in atrial fibrillation that happens. No, I disagree.
Okay, sir.
I don't know where you read that. Okay, so severe mitral stenosis seems to be a mitral valve the score of not more than 6, 7, 8, not more than 8 definitely. So the diagnosis now is pregnancy, 25 weeks, normotensive, tight mitral stenosis, pulmonary hypertension, acute pulmonary edema, sinus rhythm, congestive failure, some TR, pliable non-calcific valve. Somebody wanted to know LA thrombus. You didn't mention LA thrombus. The echo people said there is no LA thrombus. No LA thrombus. Now,
but
one thing you must know is you must know the sorry.
Left atrial appendage has to be seen, sir.
Yes, it was seen and there is no thrombus.
Yes.
So the report says the valve is suitable for BMV if you think necessary. Okay. Now just to discuss, there are many ways of assessing mitral stenosis valve suitable for balloon mitral valvotomy. The Wilkins score is the best known score, which all of us are available, but there has been a lot of criticism of Wilkins score that it concentrates only on mobility, subalveolar thickening, leaflet calcification, and the subalveolar thickening, the grading is not satisfactory in Wilkins score. So, and also the calcification doesn't give importance to whether the calcification is in the leaflet or whether it's in the commissure. For example, even a mild calcification in the commissure is a serious problem, but even a heavy calcification in the leaflet may not be such a serious problem. Therefore, there has been some criticism, but still Wilkins score is the best known score, and probably that's the only thing you must remember. If you feel like remembering the other score, you are most welcome to mug it up. But there have been other people who have tried to modify Wilkins score depending on the amount of calcification, location of calcification. Then subalveolar pathology, some people describe the length of the thickening, whether the chordae is thickened from the leaflet to the papillary muscle or only partially thickened. And there are different ways of grading subalveolar score, like Cormier, Chen, and Reed, and Nobuyoshi, so on. And this particular score, they separate out commissural disease from and non-commissural disease. That's important because Wilkins score doesn't separate commissural disease. It says calcification, but doesn't say calcification where. Okay, but I know it's difficult to remember all the scoring system, but at least remember Wilkins score in detail and remember it correctly. And remember its disadvantages that it doesn't take into account commissural disease. Okay. Now, there was a paper from Indian Heart Journal. Now, you should remember this because some examiner may have read Indian Heart Journal 2015 and he's going to ask you, this is a paper from Delhi, I think, one of the hospitals in Delhi. They have used a new system of grading subalveolar thickening with a view to balloon mitral valvotomy. And what they do is they take the short axis of the LV at the subalveolar level. They grade, normally the chordae are multiple on both sides. The two papillary muscles have multiple chordae here. And normally they are very thin and thread-like. Mild, the chordae are individually visible, but they are mildly thickened. In moderate, they become more thickened, but at least on one side, they become fused into one mass. So that becomes moderate. And then when all the chordae are fused into a single mass on both the papillary muscles, you call it severe. Okay, so mild, moderate, and severe. And then mild, moderate, and severe used to build grades of subalveolar thickening. Like if both the papillary muscles show mild or moderate, it is grade 1. If one of them is severe like this and one of them is moderate like this, then it becomes grade 2. And grade 3 is both are severe like this. So I am mentioning this paper, there is only one paper describing this, but I am mentioning it because it's an Indian paper. It's always good to know the Indian publication because in your exams, the examiner may be very key, or you may get an examiner from the same hospital, you don't know. Okay. So now the diagnosis has become, the top part of the diagnosis we already made. Now Wilkins score is 8, I would have called it 6 or 7. Subalveolar pathology mild to moderate. No LA thrombus, and we also decided that he is a very high risk category of pregnancy with heart disease. Now you can tell me your advice. You said no BMV. I think we should.
Yes, sir,
we cannot let her go to the term because she has already had one episode of pulmonary edema. And what will happen if you follow her up? If you don't do anything and follow her up, what is likely?
Chance of again cardiac events will increase, sir, and there will be high risk to.
Why should increase?
Sir, again she can go into pulmonary edema. The other thing is risk to.
Why she's now on medication? She's now on beta blockers. Why should she go into pulmonary edema again?
After delivery, there will be increase in venous return that will push her into the
Oh,
pulmonary.
after delivery, no, that is still 6 months away, maybe 5 months away. So that's okay. We'll manage after delivery.
As pregnancy progress, her blood volume would increase.
Okay, that's the answer I want. Guys, you must know the hemodynamics of pregnancy before you talk. Don't you know? Haven't you read the hemodynamics of pregnancy? The cardiac output increases in the second trimester. She is still not peaked. She is only 25 weeks. For another 4 weeks, her cardiac output is, somebody's mic is making noise. Some tap is making noise. Hello? Okay. So, she is only 25 weeks. She's got another 4 weeks to go before her cardiac output will reach a peak. So in the next 1 month or 6 weeks, she's going to develop pulmonary edema again because her cardiac output is increasing. So we cannot let her go to term. She is a very high risk case. Already one episode of pulmonary edema in the early second trimester. She is a high risk case for further pulmonary edema. Therefore, we have to do BMB with appropriate precautions. And now, though I won't go into that now because BMB is not our topic today. We have to take appropriate precautions because she is a pregnant lady, partly because of radiation, partly because of medication, partly because of the stress and everything. But you take precautions and do a BMB, it can be done. So BMB was done. Valve area increased from 1 centimeter to 1.9 centimeter square. At that stage, mild MR appeared on echo, and therefore no further dilatation was done. So, okay, we got a good split, and she felt much better. Now what? Yeah, you guys are not answering. These are all practical problems. No, haven't you seen this in your practice? And unless you know, you should be prepared. This is the way patients come. First on telephone, then come suddenly to emergency room, and you have done a partly treatment. Now, what is the plan? Follow-up means what?
Penicillin prophylaxis, sir.
Penicillin prophylaxis. Okay. Penicillin prophylaxis. That very, very long term you're talking. No? I'm talking about pregnancy and delivery now. Yeah, you agreed. Penicillin, I agree. I'm not saying you're wrong.
Continue diuretics and beta blocker and ask her to get it will be an institutional delivery where both cardiologist and neonatal facility is there.
Okay. Now, before we go to that, now why did she go to pulmonary edema? Can you tell me what is the reason for pulmonary edema? High LA pressure due to mitral stenosis. Am I right?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
But why did she go into pulmonary edema? No, because in the month of April she was not in symptom. In the month of May she went into pulmonary edema. Why did she go into pulmonary edema then?
Maybe due to arrhythmia. She had episode of atrial fibrillation.
What arrhythmia? You saw, no? She didn't have an arrhythmia. She had an
because of her pregnancy itself, she has been in second trimester now. So her cardiac
her volume. So there are many hemodynamic changes which occur in pregnancy. So you must remember that there are huge number of hemodynamic changes, and as a cardiologist, you are supposed to be aware of the physiological changes which occur in pregnancy. And this is a must. The cardiac output increases. Almost a 40% increase in cardiac output occurs during pregnancy. Throughout pregnancy, it keeps on increasing. And majority of this increase occurs in the first trimester to second trimester. At the end of the second trimester, it peaks around 40%. Okay. Now, at the same time, the heart rate also increases. Almost a 20% increase in the heart rate. So the net result is the cardiac work has increased much more, and the flow through the mitral valve has increased tremendously. And because of the heart rate increase, there's less time available for diastolic flow through the mitral valve. So overall, the mitral stenosis flow is being impaired by the increased flow and by the increased heart rate. However, the systemic vascular resistance drops. It drops by about 20%. Both systemic and pulmonary vascular resistance drops, because this is to accommodate the increase in the cardiac output. The SVR drops, the PVR drops. 20 to 30%. And therefore, although the cardiac output increases 40%, because the vascular resistance has dropped, there is net no change in the systolic BP. Systolic BP doesn't change much. At the same time, the diastolic BP may be slightly lower. Pregnancy is a hyperdynamic circulatory state, and therefore you may have a normal systolic BP but a slightly low diastolic BP. Therefore, you have a increased pulse pressure. Now, this slide is something you must remember always. Increased heart rate, increased cardiac output, fall in resistance. However, no change in the pressures at rest, no significant change in the systolic pressure, and a fall in diastolic pressure. Now, however, this is in normal people, but in a patient with mitral stenosis, when they have an increase in volume load, an increase in the heart rate, the flow is increased, therefore capillary pressure goes up. When the capillary pressure goes up, that cannot be helped by a fall in PVR and ACR. PVR and ACR doesn't help in normalizing capillary pressure. It can help only normalizing LV pressure and aortic pressure. It cannot help in normalizing pulmonary capillary pressure because there is mitral stenosis. Okay, so this is a very important slide, the hemodynamic changes. And then this graph shows the time course of events. Now this shows the weeks of pregnancy from first beginning of pregnancy to 39-40 weeks of pregnancy. And each line represents one parameter: cardiac output, stroke volume, heart rate, systolic blood pressure, diastolic blood pressure, so on and so forth. So you can see that the cardiac output and the heart rate increases in the early trimester, early pregnancy, and it peaks around the 28 to 30 weeks here. It peaks here. And the last trimester it is relatively stable. It doesn't increase any further. Similarly, the resistance, pulmonary resistance and systemic resistance drops. Again, it drops in the first trimester, second trimester, and then stable in the third trimester. Drops in the first trimester, second trimester, and then stable in the third trimester. Okay? So the maximum changes occur in the end of first trimester, throughout second trimester, and end of second trimester maximum. Third trimester is relatively peaceful. So our patient is somewhere here, 25 weeks. So another 5 weeks she has got of unstable period. If she crosses that, then we can say, okay, she may be well for another 3 months, but there is no way you can guarantee that she will be all right. Therefore, you have to relieve her mitral stenosis. And finally, the LV volume also increases. LV volume increases during pregnancy, LV and diastolic volume, to accommodate the increased volume load. So what are the causes of pulmonary edema in mitral stenosis and pregnancy? High LA pressure, increased blood volume, increased cardiac output, tachycardia. There is dilutional anemia. The volume increases mainly by increase in the water. The blood becomes more hypotonic. Therefore, the hemoglobin drops. Dilutional anemia. And because of dilution, there is also diminished in the plasma oncotic pressure. And therefore, the fluid will ooze out of the capillaries easily. So even if the light increases the pulmonary capillary pressure, the fluid will ooze out of the capillaries. Now, there is another important aspect of maternal heart disease. Maternal heart disease affects the fetus also. Now, it's very important to understand this. The maternal hypoxia aggravates fetal hypoxia because even normally the fetus is hypoxic. The normal fetal saturation is only about 80 to 85%. And normal fetal PO2 is less than 40, only about 35 to 38. Now, if you want to have a fetal PO2 of 35 to 38, you must have a maternal PO2 of at least 75 or above. If you have a maternal PO2 of 45, then fetal PO2 will drop to 10 or 15. Are you understanding? This is a very important message I am giving you. Are you listening?
Yes, yes.
If you have maternal hypoxia even to a moderate degree, the fetal hypoxia becomes very severe. When maternal oxygen is 100%, you get fetal oxygen saturation of 80 to 85%. When maternal saturation falls to 80%, fetal saturation will be only 50%. So this, you have to be very, very careful when dealing with a sick patient of cardiac with pregnancy. Maternal heart failure will lower the cardiac output, and there will be less perfusion of the uterus, less blood flow into the placenta. There will be a higher risk of miscarriage, higher incidence of preterm labor. There will be inadequate growth of the fetus because inadequate placental blood flow. Neonatal complications are much more. Premature delivery, premature death, abortion, everything is more common. Maternal medications may also affect the fetus. And finally, of course, if a mother has congenital heart disease, you can always have inherited anomalies in the baby. Therefore, maternal heart disease affects the fetus in multiple ways, but most important for your acute patient is the issue of heart failure and hypoxia. This is very, very important for your management. As a cardiologist, you should be aware of this. Now, this is a diagram of the fetal circulation. Can you see here? The umbilical vein bringing the blood back from the placenta, it has only 80% saturation. So, when the mother's blood is 100% saturation, the baby gets a saturation of 80%. Now, this blood goes to the heart, and there it mixes with the unoxygenated blood coming from the rest of the venous system and from the superior vena cava. Therefore, this 80% drops to about 60%. So, the majority of the body actually doesn't even get 80% saturation in the fetus. The majority of the fetal body gets only about 50 to 60%. Look, the blood going to the brain is only 60% saturated. And the blood going to the lower half of the body is probably around only 45 to 50% saturated. You follow this? Therefore, the fetus,
yes, sir, yes.
Even normally the fetus is in a state of hypoxia. But that is normal for the baby. But when the mother is hypoxic, then this hypoxia will be severely aggravated. Therefore, you must take care that maternal oxygen never drops to less than 90% saturation, and PO2 should never drop to less than 75. If necessary, you have to intubate and ventilate. Now, there is another important aspect of perfusion. Now, whenever heart failure occurs, you know the tissue perfusion suffers. No? Can you explain to me why? Anybody quickly explain? Where we say low cardiac output, so renal perfusion is bad. Low cardiac output, coronary perfusion is bad. What does it happen?
So there will be two causes. One, the forward flow is low, and the backward flow, pressure has increased. As a result, the renal perfusion will decrease by both the venous congestion, backflow, and also the forward flow.
Yeah, that's exactly what I want you to understand. If, for example, this is aorta, large arteries, capillaries, and veins. Here the pressure is 80 to 100. It drops to 50 to 60. Here it drops to 30 to 40. Here it dropped to about 30. Okay, and the vein is about 8 or 10. So the difference here is only from 25 to 10. Only 15 millimeter difference is there from here to here. Now imagine this is the placenta. Okay. So normally the placental artery will have a pressure of about 30, and the uterine vein would have a pressure of about 10. Therefore, the difference is only 15 to 20. Now, because as you go down from the large artery, go down into the smaller artery, the pressure drops. Okay. Now, what will happen if the patient is in congestive heart failure? Like our patient was in congestive heart failure. So the venous pressure is elevated to 18. This is 18 now. And what is arterial pressure? Still the same, 25 here. Okay, initially the difference was 20. Now the difference is only 25 to 18, only 7 or 8 or 10 millimeters of mercury. So you see the arteriovenous pressure difference has dropped from normal to less than half. Therefore, the organ perfusion will be reduced. It is not a low arterial pressure. Arterial pressure is maintained, but still the arteriovenous pressure drop has reduced, and therefore tissue perfusion drop. Therefore, placental perfusion drop. Therefore, fetal oxygenation suffers. Understand? This is important not only for placenta, this is important for all the organs in the body, whether it's heart or whether it's skeletal muscle or whether it is liver or whether it is kidney. How does heart failure affect perfusion? By reducing the arteriovenous oxygen difference. Arteriovenous, not oxygen difference, sorry. Arteriovenous pressure difference. Okay. Therefore, this lady had a PO2 of 46 with a pH of 7.2 with saturation of 89%. Therefore, she needs immediate ventilation with a PEEP. Try to maintain it above 70 PO2, saturation of at least 95, and try to keep carbon dioxide less than 40 and pH of more than 7.3. So this should be our goal of ventilation. Okay, now further plan. So just doing a BMV is not enough. You have to assess the fetus also. Make sure the fetus has survived all this pulmonary edema and all that. So you need to assess that. You need to carefully supervise during the rest of the pregnancy because she is yet to peak for cardiac output, volume, load and rest towards the end of the second trimester. Now there is another stressful period at the labor and early postpartum period because labor is a very stressful period because they have to strain and they have to undergo pain and they are anxious, tachycardia, blood loss, so many things are happening. Further rise in cardiac output of 10 to 15% occurs at delivery. LA pressure rises at that time. There is auto transfusion, because when the uterus shrinks, the entire the blood in the uterine wall is squeezed back into the mother. Therefore, the blood volume increases by 20% in the mother at delivery. There is marked tachycardia during labor. There will be a drop of hemoglobin if there is bleeding. And of course, Valsalva is very poorly tolerated in mitral stenosis. Already she is in a marginal state. Therefore, second trimester is a danger zone and labor and early postpartum period, first 48 hours after labor is another danger zone when she needs to be closely monitored. So during labor, please tell the obstetricians either you have to be physically present or you tell the obstetrician that please ensure adequate pain relief by epidural, whatever. Make the second stage easy and short. Do mechanical delivery, assisted delivery, whatever you want to do, please make it short and easy. At the first sign of trouble, take for cesarean section. Watch for blood loss, fluid balance, vital signs should be monitored continuously, especially arterial saturation, so she is likely to go into pulmonary edema again. Please monitor the baby, whether the baby is not in distress. And during the postpartum period, again watch out for hemoglobin saturation and constantly first 48-72 hours watch out for either pulmonary edema or pulmonary embolism. Those are the two things. And finally, after delivery, later follow-up, what's your advice? Come on. What's your advice?
That's what, sir. Regular follow-up will be there. Yes. Medical management.
One is medical management, regular follow-up. Then what medical management?
Sir, seems diuretics and beta blocker, sir.
Okay.
And then penicillin prophylaxis we have to.
Okay.
We will continue. That is there. And regular. That's for regular echo, sir. 6 monthly to 1 yearly echo we have to do.
Come on, 6 months. You think mitral stenosis will not 6 monthly echo? Maybe one follow-up at 6 months. After that, maybe yearly follow-up is good enough. Okay.
Yes, yes.
Now that's an important message I'm telling you. This is a simple case of mitral stenosis with pregnancy, but there's so much to learn from that case. You have to learn from every case that you follow. Okay, that's the end of my case presentation. If you have another 10 minutes, last time I promised to tell you how to measure mean gradient. Do you want to have another 5-10 minutes?
Yes, sir, of course.
Okay. Right. Now there are two pressure tracings here. One is LA or pulmonary artery wedge and the LV-EDP, and another one is LV and aorta pressure tracing. Of course, one way is you can measure the peak-to-peak gradient, but for many purposes, for assessing severity, for measuring the valve area and all, you need the mean gradient. Now, it's important that you know what is the meaning of mean gradient. What is the meaning of mean gradient? Can anybody define? Quick, Baba. Anybody answering?
No, sir.
Is the average between the two entire times, sir?
Average between the entire time. No, I didn't understand that. Can you say that again? I know what you mean, but you're not telling it clearly.
Sir, pulse pressure plus 1/3 of the diastolic pressure.
Hey, come on. That's not used in the cath lab. That is used in the OPD and or ICU.
So during the entire period, we have to measure the average, sir.
Yeah. So by mean gradient, what we mean is, see, when you record the difference in pressure, the difference in pressure is different here. At each point, it is different. Here it is low. Here it is higher. It is very high. Again here it is low. Again here it's low. So by mean gradient we mean the average difference over the entire time period from this point to this point in case of diastole, and from this point to this point in case of systole. So the average difference in pressure, average gradient across this time interval. So gradient upon time, that is what we want. But gradient upon time, they are both different units. Time is measured in second, the gradient is measured in millimeters of mercury. You can't divide gradient by time. So you have to do something else. So there are different ways of measuring the gradient. You can measure gradient. Classically, for diagnosing mitral stenosis, you measure end diastolic gradient. That is the end of diastole from here to here. Okay. For aortic stenosis, commonly what they take is you measure the peak aortic pressure and you measure the peak LV pressure, and the difference is peak to peak gradient, right? But now we want the mean gradient. How to do it? Now this is the same tracing where we are recording the LV and LA tracing. Then classically we measure the gradient from here. Now the best thing is many cath lab papers have this square printed on the recording paper. Now this square has 1 millimeter square, so 1 millimeter like this and 1 millimeter like this. Generally, you record the atrial and LV-EDP at a low scale, like 10 millimeter per centimeter scale. 10 millimeter per centimeter scale means 1 centimeter per 10 millimeters of mercury. 10 millimeters of mercury per centimeter. So 1 centimeter would be how many? 10 millimeters. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So 10 millimeters is equal to 10 millimeters. 10 millimeters on the square paper is equal to 10 millimeters of mercury, or 1 millimeter is equal to 1 millimeter of mercury. Okay, that is how you calculate the gradient. So you drop a vertical line from the point where the LA pressure crosses the LV and to the point of where the end diastole occurs, here where the upstroke starts. So the difference between how much is this 1, 2 and 3, another 0.5. So 3.5 millimeters is equal to 3.5 millimeter gradient. So the end diastolic gradient is 3.5 millimeter. Now any gradient at end diastole is a sign of mitral stenosis. So we have proved mitral stenosis by showing that there is an end diastolic gradient. However, we want to get the mean gradient. Now I want to know how much is the mean gradient throughout diastole. So there are many ways we can do this. One is draw multiple lines on the graph paper. Now incidentally, if your cath lab doesn't have a graph paper like this, all you do is you superimpose your pressure tracing on a graph paper. You get graph paper in any stationery shop. You superimpose your pressure tracing on a graph paper and draw a number of vertical lines like this. And on each line you measure the gradient same way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 millimeters on this line, 10 millimeters on this line, 7 millimeters on this line, 6 on this line, 5 on this line, 4.5 on this line, 4, 3, 3, 3, like that. You keep on. So you got about 18 lines on this, and you get 18 values. Add them all together and divide it by the number of lines. Are you with me? Are you following?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
So this is the simplest way of getting, manual way of getting mean gradient. Now, nowadays nobody wants to do manual gradient. That's a different thing. But then this is the way you should do. One day if your computer doesn't work and your printout doesn't come out, and you get the pressure tracing alone, that's the way to calculate mean gradient. That is, you draw a number of vertical lines. The next step is to do by the area method. Now, for example, this gradient is represented by the area between the two curves. Okay. So the area between the two curves can be measured in two ways. One is you count the number of squares again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, like that. You count the number of squares inside this. Now, whenever there is a line is cutting across the square, if it is more than 50%, you include it in the counting. If it is less than 50%, you exclude it. Simple. Okay. So when you do that, you count all the number of squares here. Then I get about 52 squares in this. 5, 2. That means the area of this is equal to 52 millimeters square. Okay, because each square is 1 millimeter, 52 millimeters square. Then, now that is the area under this. Now I have to divide it by the time. Now I have to divide it by the same unit. I can't divide it by seconds. Now how is time represented here? Time is also represented by squares here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So I divide 52 by 11. 52 by 11 would be somewhere around 4.8. 4.8. Okay. So the mean gradient is 4.8. Did you get what I said? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
So you count the number of squares, measure the area underneath this, divide it by the duration of the diastole, measured in millimeters, not in time measurement, but this you are measuring in millimeter square. Therefore, divided by measured in millimeters. So this millimeter square, 52 divided by 11 millimeter representing the duration is equal to 52 divided by 11, you get 4.9. That's the mean gradient. Now that is the manual way of doing it. If you are a very scientific modern person and if you have worked in a scientific lab, you must have seen an instrument like this. Has anybody seen an instrument like this? I've given the name also at the top. This is called a planimeter. The planimeter is an instrument which is used by engineering people, archaeology students, all the people who make maps and all. When they want to measure the area of an irregular area like this, they use an instrument which has got a one fixed point and then there is a pivot. So, and this has a dial which gives the reading. So what they do is they keep the point on one point of the shape and then set 0 here and then you go trace it. Come back to the starting point and then this will give you the area in the dial here. You remember this is exactly what you do in the echo machine when you do a mean gradient. There you are doing electronic calipers. Here you are doing mechanical calipers. That's all the difference. Got it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So now this was the planimeter which we used to use when we were training. But nowadays planimeters have become very fashionable. They have become digital. So they have a fixed point and then a point which rotates on with a lens. That point is, instead of there's a pin, you have a light point now to trace, and then you get the value in the digital form. So that's the planimeter we use. So we can always use that planimeter to trace this area. Okay, the whole thing we have traced. Now that area is coming in centimeter square or millimeter square, whatever it is. But you have to convert it to millimeters of mercury. How to do that is what I have shown in this slide. Calculation of mean gradient from area. Mean gradient is equal to area into, mean gradient we have to calculate first. We won't take the sums. Now, we require the following thing. First, area. Area in the planimeter, you get either millimeter square or centimeter, whichever you want it. Your scale, you know already, 1 millimeter per millimeter scale in the graph paper. You already know that, isn't it? Now, you can take either millimeter or centimeter, but you must take the same in all the parameters. You should not take different. If you take millimeter here also you should take millimeter, here also you take millimeters. If you take centimeters here also you take centimeter, here also you take centimeters. Therefore, the mean gradient is equal to area multiplied by scale divided by the duration of diastolic filling period. So, the area you will get is in millimeter square. So, I told you I got 52 millimeters square. Then the scale was 1 millimeter per millimeter. Remember, that's what I told you. 1 millimeter is equal to 1 millimeter of mercury. So, that is the scale. And what is the diastolic filling period? I told you they were 11 millimeters. Right?
Yes, sir. Yes.
So, whether you do it by counting the square or whether you do it by a planimetry, you divide the area by the diastolic filling square, number of square. 52 divided by 11 is equal to 4.7. That's the mean gradient. So you have an end diastolic gradient of 3.5 and a mean diastolic gradient of 4.7. So you can do the same thing for the aortic stenosis also. You can do the same thing for any chamber. Wherever you want to measure the chamber mean pressure, you can do that. For example, when you are doing the right atrial pressure. Now, right atrial pressure has a wave, X descent, a C wave, X prime descent, and a V wave and a Y descent. So, but we always want the mean RA pressure, isn't it? Now, mean RA pressure is not the mean of A and V and divide by 2. That is the totally wrong answer. You have to calculate the mean pressure under the curve here, under the curve. How do you do that? You take a given point from here to here or from here to here, from any point, 1 cycle, 2 cycles, 3 cycles, however many cycles you want, and take the planimeter, start from 0 here and trace. That's it. Same as what you do in echo, the electronic calipers too. That's how you do mean gradient, isn't it? When you're tracing the area for a mean gradient.
Yes, yes.
That's exactly what you do for mean pressure. So you can use a planimetric method either with a multiple lines. You can also draw multiple lines here. One line here, one line here, one line here, one line, one here, one here, one here, one here, one. Draw as many lines. The more number of lines you draw, the more accurate your mean pressure will be. So draw a line representing all the variation, add up and divide by number of lines, or put a graph paper and count the number of graph squares inside it, divided by the duration, or take a planimeter, do a planimetry and divide it by the duration. It all gives you the same mean gradient. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Now it looks very simple, but I find many people don't answer this in the examination. Have you ever done mean gradient calculation before, any of you? Honestly tell me, How many of you have done a mean gradient calculation in the cath lab? What the cath lab technician gives you on a paper, you accept it, I know. But how many of you have yourself done a mean gradient calculation? Anybody has done it? Please put on your mic and tell me. Oh, that is sad. I think you must. But today you have learned something new. Please practice it at least once or twice so that you don't forget it. No, it's already, your machine may give you an automatic reading. One day the technician is going to make a mistake. One day the machine will not be working. As a consultant, you must know how the machine is calculating. You must be able to spot out that the machine is wrong. Unless you know the background theory, you cannot be a good consultant. Don't accept everything that your technician gives you. Okay? I think I'll stop here. I think
Yes,
valve and all I will discuss another day. So that's the most important message I would like to do. Please learn from every case that you see, because there is a lot of practical and theoretical knowledge in that case, like this pregnant lady. Okay, thank you. Any questions?
No, sir. No, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot, sir. Sir, next week, what we'll have, sir?
I think I'll